Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Ogden. I'm an editor with LPAC TV, and I would like to welcome all of you to the webcast for April 26th, 2013. This is part of our regular Friday evening webcast series. Now, joining me in the studio today are Jason Ross and Leandra Bernstein, and we'll be joined by Mr. LaRouche via video conference from Europe, from Germany. To begin our webcast today, I would like to ask Leandra Bernstein to come to the podium to pose the first question.
Hello, Mr. LaRouche from far away. So our first question comes in from an institutional contact in the Washington, D.C. area who has been following the events in the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing. And this question deals with the international implications of what happened in Boston. As we know from reports, the two brothers accused of the bombing were born in Chechnya. Their parents are living in Dagestan. And there's still questions up in the air about what the older brother, who's viewed as the more informed brother, was doing in Russia for the 6 months that he was there 1 year ago. Now, just yesterday, on Thursday, President Putin made a statement that what occurred in Boston should spur closer intelligence cooperation between the United States and Moscow. And from what we've posted on the LaRouche PAC site, we do know that there has been an ongoing intelligence collaboration between the United States and Russia since the aftermath of the original 9/11/2001 terrorist attack. So as Putin was making this statement, there were also statements coming from an unnamed administration official of the Obama administration saying that the terrorist suspects were self-radicalized and immediately trying to bury any notion of a foreign connection, stating there was no foreign connection. These men were self-radicalized. A member of the House of Representatives, Representative McCall from Texas, said that this assertion from the Obama administration was obviously premature. But what we know as LaRouche PAC and what Executive Intelligence Review and you yourself have been in the middle of exposing is the issue in the Caucasus since the turn of the century. The British and Saudi Arabian intervention into the Caucasus, which you highlighted in particular in 1999 in your Storm Over Asia video, as Executive Intelligence Review highlighted in many publications around that time. And so we know of networks that received training in Afghanistan and were moved into the Caucasus to then be deployed against Russia and against Asia. At the fall of the Soviet Union, Chechnya itself became essentially a UN-approved NGO, and there were various operations. It became the staging ground for British operations, in particular, to fragment larger nations in the Eurasian continent. And so within this staging ground, Chechnya, Azerbaijan, Dagestan, the Caucasus region generally, you have major operations which arose following the collapse of the USSR by a religious minority, which is the Wahhabites. And you saw a rise in Wahhabism in the Caucasus. And I'll just say there was an interesting report from a member of the House of Representatives we met with earlier this week, and the representative asserted that there are only two things that the Saudis export. The first is oil. The second is Wahhabism. So we've really come back to identifying the British-Saudi nexus in a tangential form, or as the mother of current terrorist operations. The Saudi-British nexus that we identified as behind the original 9/11 attacks, which we were also able to trace the 9/11 2012 attacks in Benghazi back to. And at this time, I'd like to get your view on two things. The first, I'd like to get your view on the current motions in Congress to really dig into this British-Saudi nexus, in particular the Saudi aspect, where Walter Jones, representative from North Carolina, has repeatedly called for the release of the 28 pages of the original 9/11 Commission report, to reopen the case of the original 9/11 Commission, and has sent letters to the House Permanent Committee on Intelligence. That's one. And second, Frank Wolf, Democrat from Virginia, is actually gaining very significant support for his House Resolution 36, calling for a select committee to investigate Benghazi. And even after the interim report on Benghazi was released earlier this week, it's still proving to be highly insufficient. There are currently 120 co-sponsors on Representative Wolf's call resolution to open a select committee on Benghazi. So the first part of the question is, what is your view on that motion coming from Congress? And then second, with the role that Russian intelligence is proving to play in identifying the connections behind these suspects, the question from the institutional figure is whether global cooperation is possible against this Wahhabite, this neo-Salafi terrorist nexus in the wake of the Boston bombing.
Well, on the question of is there cooperation, yes, there is cooperation in this process. And we have the cooperation from Dempsey in particular, representing the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who is very, very effective and very, obviously, very sincere. We have other forces in the United States and elsewhere which have a different story. Now, this whole thing has complexities. The complexities remind us of what happened when Bismarck was dumped on orders from the British monarchy, and his being dumped set into motion a whole series of things, including a series of wars, assassinations of several types, and all these kinds of things. We have a similar kind of pattern, which goes back into the beginning of the young Bush administration of the United States. The young Bush administration of the United States also set into motion a similar kind of pattern, leading in the direction of a potential global form of warfare. That was the successor to World War I, and which was actually the overthrow of getting Bismarck out of the picture and into what was called officially World War I and World War II. Now we're on the edge of World War III. So that trying to read this story, you cannot read by simple deduction what this is going to mean. What you have, obviously, is the following. You have, as began with the Chechnya problem, that was a beginning point and phase point in this thing, which corresponded to the collapse of the Soviet Union in its finality. I was coming out of some health care at that point, and I caused the writing of a program on that kind of operation, which included the Chechnya area at that time. So that was the kind of thing that occurred. But the essential thing is the British Empire is the bad guy in this case, and it has a lot of access to it. But the essential thing is we have a negotiation in process between elements in Russia and elsewhere, but especially Russia in this case. And that has Dempsey's role in this whole process, both in respect to China now as well as in respect to Russia and the United States. So therefore, I think we have to put our estimates in those terms, not something lesser. You have a broad case of a general warfare comparable in general warfare to what happened as World War I, which actually began with the ouster of Bismarck from power in Germany, into World War II, and now we're into World War III. That's the way to look at it. We have a very serious effort because everyone who's intelligent recognizes that you cannot have a war which involves the United States against Russia and some other countries. You can't have it because such a war is a thermonuclear war. And a thermonuclear war is an extermination of people war. Probably the extermination of the entire human species, whether immediately or in a countdown kind of process. So we can't get a mechanical interpretation of any of this stuff. We have to look at the overall picture. There is the intention, which is organized by the British monarchy, the Queen herself, and this is leading to a very special kind of approach toward what will become a thermonuclear war. And all these other things are complications in terms of people playing games with each other, which is, I think, is what's happening also in the Congress, in some elements of the Congress as well. But the whole story reduces simply to the fact we are in a threshold of a new global world war, a global thermonuclear war. We have powerful forces, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, negotiating with Russia, and that is one of the most important features of the whole process at present. I think those are the terms you've got to look in terms of at this point.
Hey, Lynn. Let me ask you a question about the sort of getting a little bit more into this silly asteroid program that the Obama administration has put forward. Made fun of this before, but there's some more details are emerging about this. The current plan that Obama's got for NASA is this catch an asteroid program. So this would mean, first off, we'd have to find an asteroid small enough to capture. Asteroids that small, we don't really know where any of them are, so that's going to be a problem. It could be an opportunity to find all of these things, but I doubt that's the way it would go. Then once we find such a small asteroid, the plan would be to send out a small spacecraft powered by solar panels to very, very, very slowly nudge that asteroid into orbit around the moon. Now, this technology involved, the solar electric thruster, really wouldn't be a helpful one at all for manned missions. It's very, very slow, has a very low amount of energy density. So we'd be investing in a technology that wouldn't have applications later to go to the moon or Mars. Once we've got the thing in lunar orbit, the administration then proposes that we would totally unnecessarily send people out to the moon to look at it, take a picture with it, and then bring a smaller piece back to the Earth, even though we could have just gone out and brought a piece back to the Earth without sending people there for the photo opportunity. Now, it's just such a silly program that people, at some recent meetings and discussions in the evenings, people are really making fun of it at NASA, and they're a little bit embarrassed that that's the program that's supposedly defining them. So let me ask you about this, because the obvious alternative is to simply go ahead with what we need to do in terms of planetary defense, with moving towards a base on the moon and on Mars, or a sample return from Mars. We get samples of asteroids all the time when they land on the Earth. It's not as though we've never seen a piece of an asteroid before. So going through all this effort's a bit unnecessary when we could just be going to Mars instead, as part of a program of overall increasing our energy abilities as a species. So the fusion breakthroughs that we would need for a real Mars program, for a real mastery of the Venus-Mars region to deal with asteroid threats in an internationally cooperative way, that would be a real mission that would have real benefits for us. So I was hoping you could say something about the direction that we could take internationally, cooperatively, using this as an approach, and what role that would have for international politics right now.
Well, first of all, we've got to look at the fact that the NASA program was essentially cut back as a result of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and also his brother, who was then about to run as a presidential candidate as well. So what happened, because what should have happened at that point, once we had the landing on the moon, the manned landing on the moon, we were at the point to develop a system which would reach objectives like Mars, and those systems would open up the development of the moon as a place from which to launch most of our exploration within the solar system, in particular. Because the problem here is getting to do the exploration within the space program. We really don't want to launch directly from Earth into areas, targets in space. What we would wish to do is to build up an efficient system base built on the moon, which is much more economical in terms of power requirements, rather than trying to shoot from Earth into space, into a space target. So that is where I think we should be looking. That when you take those things into account, then everything that the president is doing, or hinting that he's going to do, is absolutely worse than absurd and silly. It has no functional value to it. It's a piece of nonsense, for which he ought to be impeached, if he didn't already have enough reasons to be impeached. Something that would put that up is really an impeachable offense against the human species.
Well, if Obama is not very popular in the solar system, he's also certainly gaining no friends or allies in the United States right now. I should mention that at a recent building trades conference held in Washington, D.C., just prior to a very big day of lobbying on Capitol Hill, the president of the Building Trades Union, Sean McGarvey, made a statement to this conference, basically saying that the unions will no longer give a blank check to the Democrats. So this is pretty significant in terms of the waning support for Obama. But on this conference, I'll just say that from discussions with representatives of different unions from literally all over the country, virtually every state across the country, the knowledge of GlassSteagall and GlassSteagall as a key starting point for any kind of economic recovery, anything that has to do with the creation of jobs, with the revitalization of production in the United States. It was very clear to the majority of people who LaRouche PAC and EIR spoke to, that it begins with Glass-Steagall. And there were serious questions. Has my representative signed on? What do I have to tell my senator? I know who these people are. I worked to get them elected. They know me. They know my name. They know my face. What am I going to drop on their lap when I go into lobby them? And so this response to Glass-Steagall, and then the response to NWAPA, of course, the most ambitious construction program, you could say, the largest construction site mankind has fathomed up until now. That was very exciting to people, but still they were very much in the reality of the present moment, the crisis in the United States, the crisis hitting in Europe, that the U.S. could be seeing conditions similar to Cyprus, to Spain, to Greece, in the near term. So I'll just report that following in the middle of the week, LaRouche PAC had a major deployment into D.C. Again, this is the final week before Congress is back in their districts for approximately 2 weeks. And so we had a major deployment with a huge banner, Austerity for Wall Street, Restore Glass-Steagall, Pass H.R. 129. And we were being swarmed by these union figures who we had spoken to in the prior days, reporting on their meetings where Glass-Steagall was discussed, hand-delivering leaflets from our deployment outside of the Capitol into the meetings they were having. In one case, one of these union officials brought a leaflet on Glass-Steagall into the Capitol Hill Club and threw it down on the table and said, "Debate this. Debate Glass-Steagall." And they did it. So with, again, one thing that I'll mention about this sector of the population, I mean, they're productive. In one case, I was asked, well, what do you think? Because I was on a deployment with all of our posters, organizing material, and I was asked, what do you think about the building trades union? And I said, well, you're underworked. And he agreed. He definitely agreed. But for these people who are productive, who do have a more realistic sense of where the nation needs to go, who have fewer of the economic illusions, because they know if they don't transform something, then they didn't do their job, and they're not going to get paid. If they didn't build something, they didn't work. So what is your message for this productive sector of the population?
The construction field and all its implications inside the United States, but not limited entirely to the United States, but most prominently there, is that it goes directly into the policy question of how does our system of government operate in terms of economic development. And it is construction. Now, what's the significance of construction as such? Well, if it's a real project, a serious project, say like NWAPA, something like that, that's a real project, and that's a winner. And that's a winner for the world because it sets an example. First of all, instead of trying to produce something merely to sell it or to make an income on it from jobs, but if you actually go at that kind of approach, what you're going to do is increase the productive powers of labor for everyone involved. And that means that you are going back to Alexander Hamilton's principle of the United States, what the United States must be and what it must do in order to succeed in its unique mission. The contrast is the British Queen. The British Queen is saying we're going to reduce the population of the planet in the direction of approximately from 7 billion to 1 billion persons. We're going to eliminate skilled employment. We're going to green jobs, which is a reduction, a degeneration, actually. So what's the difference? The difference is a Hamilton difference, that we must increase the productivity and the benefit in terms of productivity with each cycle of production. Now, we used to use farming as a beginning point for a cycle of production. The farmers grew a crop or the equivalent. They marketed the crop, at which point they got their money from selling that crop that they had produced. And the result of that, more employment of a higher quality in manufacturing and transportation, for example, went into place. So that there was an inherently built-in increase in the per capita personal productivity of every member of society. At least that's the system. Now, what the United States still has that built into our system. There are other countries, of course, which do have incentives in this direction. But with the Hamilton system, we made the market. We created it, as no one else has. Therefore, when we go back to our standard, we no longer depend upon best guessing on money. We don't invest in money. We invest in productivity. We invest in creativity and productivity, so that every time we turn a wheel, we become stronger, more effective, more productive. And we spread this idea of productivity throughout the population. You remember the United States, take the Ellis Island, United States. We took people in, say, 3 or more successive generations coming into the United States as poor people. We classed as poor for the main. There were other cases, but the majority were pluses. And each generation would tend to rise to a higher level of skill and productivity and power of creativity. And therefore, we represent that. The minute we put GlassSteagall into place, the minute we do that, we start that kind of machine going right away. It goes in the first season. It goes in the first season of the productive year. It set the pattern for other nations to copy. Nations like China, which has not yet understood this method. China does not really have an effective method. They have an effective method in one term, but they're not increasing the personal factor of productivity at the high rate that we were doing in the United States during the great immigration periods of the United States. So therefore, we set a pattern still today of how to take the potential of a population of an entire planet and turn this into a machine of productivity, a machine of progress, which is constantly accelerating. And we in the United States represent that, as no other nation on this planet does. And that's what the issue is on this case.
So on constantly accelerating progress, I wanted to take up, or I suppose follow up on a concept that you were discussing in the Policy Committee show on Monday, where you talked about the need to produce, you need to have a certain level of production to keep up. You know, the parallels between human economy and evolution, I don't think are accidental. As Vernadsky has viewed it, over evolutionary time, we have seen changes in the types of organisms that exist on the Earth in a way that is similar to changes in society as a whole in terms of our economic power. And there are some common themes that are seen in these changes. One of them is an increased, you might say, independence from the environment, or perhaps better said, self-reliance or creation of the necessary environment for the organism. So if you take a very obvious example, the move of life from the oceans onto land, obviously there's a greater independence from the environment. Living organisms are very wet. In the ocean, that's easy. On land, it's not. You've got to almost bring the ocean with you in terms of your internal environment, in terms of the different kinds of reproduction that took place to deal with the dry environment. Or just the simple fact that of being able to move on your own. It was a big shift in ocean life. If you think of the first multicellular life in the ocean, it's not that glamorous. If you think of a sea sponge, it sits on a rock somewhere, it gets larger, becomes a larger sponge, and it just sits there, cycling water through it, seeing if it has anything to munch in it. If there's not a lot of food there, too bad. You can't do anything about it. Compare that to a fish, which is able to, of course, move around in search of what it wants to eat. The other thing that's seen is an increasing, you would say in human terms, a capital intensity or an energy intensity in life. The caloric needs of mammals versus reptiles are an order of magnitude higher. So take a look at human economy and some of the measures that you've used in your economics textbook to characterize economic growth. One of those that you brought up was an increasing capital intensity of the economy. That a sign of economic growth is that less and less as a percentage of the economy is based on the production of immediately necessary goods. So, food, shelter, things like that. An increasing portion of the economy is making the environment for production itself, capital intensity, that's going to be an increasing share of our economic output. So in this respect, it's for the greenies to say that we should be natural. There is no form of life that we should be natural to or similar to. We are similar to life as a whole, but not to one species. It would be very unnatural to try to act like one species of baboon, although some members of the British royal family seem to be doing a pretty good job of that. So let me ask you if you could say some more about this, about what the direction of progress right now needs to look like.
Well, simply, we're going to have to go to Mars, not because we're going to do some great exploration there as such, but because we have to actually rise to deal with our solar system. And if you don't get a control, well, we have to put it this way: we have to change our attention from looking at Mars as a place that you can grow something on, and look at the point of the importance of controlling Mars as a part with other bodies, asteroids and whatnot, loose in the system, which you need in order to have access to the ability to increase the potentiality of the solar system for us. Our objective is not to land on Mars as such. Our objective is to make induce changes in Mars, directly or indirectly, which change the ability of mankind to progress by taking over more and more of the management of the solar system itself and beyond. So we have to think of mankind as mental, the creative powers of mind, and we wish to exercise and express those powers of mind in every way we can. We intend to increase the rate of progress of mankind per capita and in every other term for each generation. That we are going for that which is good because it is inherently good. The increasing power of mankind to develop the solar system is a thing, an object, which is a good done, which needs no other purpose than doing it itself. And that's what we have to understand. We have to go away from the idea of fooling with objects, which is one way of looking at things and seems often to be reasonable. But when you think about the solar system as a whole, what you really want to do is you want to get control of the solar system as a whole, for its own sake, so to speak. That we have to change the solar system, both to defend the existence of mankind as a factor in the solar system, and for the kinds of accomplishments that doing that will mean in terms of the ricochet of progress in first the inside of the solar system, and then to the solar system at a larger scale.
Well, I have a concluding question, and it's along the lines of what I brought up, that Congress will be in their districts beginning next week. And we have had an incredible amount of motion on GlassSteagall, the fight for GlassSteagall. We added, I believe, three more co-sponsors this week in the House. We're working on the Senate. I mean, we just had Senator Angus King from Maine give his maiden floor speech on the Senate, where he discussed the need for GlassSteagall, and you can pretty much guarantee that he's feeling the pressure being put on him from the Maine State House, from the work that we're doing, from the relentless efforts of the main co-sponsor, the main co-sponsor in the Maine State House, to push on Senator King to come out in blatant support of GlassSteagall. I mean, we've had a huge response in the Missouri legislature, in Colorado, against what we thought was going to be the case. We did get a resolution introduced in the Colorado State House. We had a major day of action in New York State, in Albany. And there's some significant motion coming out of Iowa, which we'll happily announce when we can do so. So with these responses, as well as other calls bolstering our efforts in the United States, coming from Europe, coming from even the former director of the Bank of England, Andrew Haldane, and then the efforts that our organization in Europe, our allies in Europe, are contributing to this fight. My question to you is, what are the marching orders for this coming week's efforts to put GlassSteagall in as law?
The point is that we in the United States represent the only nation which is capable of impelling the planet in the large to survive. It's that simple. Take the entirety of Europe. There is no serious commitment throughout the entirety of Europe to do anything, even to prevent a general reversal of everything that mankind in Europe had represented earlier. However, if we, with our policy, with our Constitution, our federal Constitution, and with what Hamilton represented in that Constitution, when we reactivate that quality within us, we are in a position and an obligation to inspire the rest of the world to wake up. Now, in the worst case in the sense at hand is Europe. Europe and South America are generally the worst cases on the planet, without taking into account what Africa represents. But from the standpoint of relative capability to progress, this is the point. Europe has given up. The problem in Asia is that Asia is relying on too large a percentile of simple labor, not enough increase in productive powers of labor, not enough swallowing of personal scientific growth and progress in the nature of their work and understanding. So we have to inspire China, India, other countries which do have some significant accomplishment of this nature. But we have to go further. We have to take those parts of the world that want to march ahead and rapidly, and we have to cooperate. We in the United States must do it because we are the best qualified by a potential which is lodged in our tradition, a tradition which no other part of this planet has. And that's our mission. We must set the example. What we are doing in the United States, to the astonishment of a lot of people in Europe, we are doing things that they wouldn't even dream of accomplishment now. And we in our organization, are actually doing it.
Well, on that note of encouragement, I think we can bring a conclusion to our broadcast today. I'd like to thank Jason and Leandra, and thank you heartily, Mr. LaRouche, and we look forward to more occasions of this type. So thank you for watching, and that brings a conclusion to our broadcast tonight.